Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1989 war drama, Casualties of War. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I would like to give a special shout out to Deshawnday for requesting this review. If I mispronounced the name, I'm sorry. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. The link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, Casualties of War is, in my opinion, one of the best films about the Vietnam War. Quentin Tarantino actually called it his personal favorite film about the Vietnam War. But it is also an incredibly harrowing and heart wrenching film. And that's by design because of the subject matter and because of the atrocity that is the focus of the story. But it does make for quite a intense and really difficult watch. But all of that being said, I think it's an incredible film. I think it's a really genuinely underrated film and one of De Palma's best. It's directed by Brian De Palma, who you might recognize as a guy who's done a bunch of suspense thrillers like Body Double, and he was also the director of Scarface, and he's done a multitude and a myriad of different kind of films, gangster movies, like The Untouchables, and I feel that his direction in this is every bit as dynamic and every bit as strong as anything else that he did in his prime. The opening shot that involves Erikson trapped in a foxhole while there's mortars going off in the jungle, and it pans from him being stuck in the foxhole down to underneath his feet, and the camera then travels underneath the ground and follows the tunnels, and then shows that there's this Viet Cong who's slowly crawling towards Erikson, is an incredible, absolutely phenomenal feat of filmmaking. And the film features a fair amount of other shots like that in terms of the way that the shots are framed, the way that De Palma shoots these sequences that are equally as impressive. And just the way that he handles the intensity and the emotion and just the overall visceral nature of the story is also something that is very technically sound. De Palma is, in my opinion, one of the best directors of his time and of his generation, and his work in Casualties of War is no exception to that. I mean, even the sequence where the girl, the Vietnamese girl who became this unfortunate victim of abuse by these soldiers, the sequence when she's trying to walk away on this railroad and she's bleeding to death is honestly one of the most upsetting and just emotionally charged sequences, and not just a war film, but honestly in any film that I've seen. So to effectively convey and to showcase those kind of intense emotions visually without coming across as forced or heavy-handed is something that is not necessarily the easiest thing to do, and De Palma pulls it off brilliantly. And even just when it comes to sequences involving characters just speaking with one another, it's just a film that is very consistently solid from a directorial standpoint. Like the trial at the end, even some of the moments involving the soldiers, Erikson and the other men in his platoon who are intimidating him and being hyper aggressive, or the scene in the barracks where they try to blow him up with a grenade. There's a very palpable sense of tension throughout these scenes. And De Palma's experience as a suspense director really does pay off when it comes to these particular sequences. And yeah, I think that it's some of his finest work. I think not enough people, when they discuss De Palma's career, really mention Casualties of War on the same level as some of his other films. And I think that his direction in this is every bit as good and every bit as compelling and every bit as slick and as well done as any other film in his filmography. And then you have a screenplay by David Rabb, based on a story by Daniel Lang. Now, the story that it's based on is an actual article called Casualties of War that was published in 1969. And after De Palma had his huge hit in The Untouchables, he had the green light to do whatever he wanted afterwards. And he decided he wanted to do Casualties of War. And he brought on David Rabb. Casualties of War is, like I said at the beginning of this review, it's one of the most harrowing and just heart-wrenching films about war that I've honestly ever seen. And it's because of the fact that it's so unflinching in terms of showcasing these damaged young men and their horrific actions in a war zone, as well as individuals who, despite everything that's happening, despite everything that they've seen and everything that they've been through, they refuse to allow the hell of war to consume them. They refuse to become these beasts of war, and they decide to fight for what's right. I really like the opening of the film. I think it's not only an exciting, thrilling war sequence involving Erikson and the rest of the platoon in the middle of a battle with mortars exploding everywhere, but I think it's one of the most genuinely suspenseful sequences that I've seen in any war film. When Erikson gets trapped in the foxhole and he's stuck in the foxhole and there's mortars blowing up around him and he's screaming and calling for help, and the camera then decides to pan down below and now there's a Viet Cong with a knife trying to go after him under the ground. It's some really suspenseful, intense stuff. And when the sergeant, Meserve, winds up saving Erikson, it's a really interesting way to start out the dynamic between these two characters. It is not necessarily what you might expect, considering how Meserve would become a very intimidating antagonist for Erikson for pretty much the rest of the film. And at the start of it, it didn't really come across that way. He risked his life to save Erikson. It goes to show you that in war, things are a lot more complicated than you might expect. You could have somebody who becomes a legitimate Section 8, like Meserve, but they have done heroic things. And they have even done things that have benefited someone like Erikson directly, who ultimately becomes the person who is willing to put Meserve and his men on the stand for their crimes. It's like, yeah, you saved my life, but that doesn't mean that your wrongs equal a right. But it is one of those things where it creates this facade of safety and, oh, okay, you got through the worst of it. You escaped the foxhole. Reserve saved Erikson. They're gonna be away from the battlefield, and you get to see Erikson and the other members of his platoon bonding with one another. And Erikson, he winds up starting to form a bit of a friendship with this platoon member named Brownie. And just when you think, like, okay, if things are fine, things are settled down, Brownie gets shot by one of the Viet Cong that are there at that were hiding and just waiting for that opportunity at the area that they were staying at um, after they got out of the jungle. And it just goes to show you that in a war, and honestly in any war, like, it's never over. Like, you see that, oh, well, everything's calm now, everything's good, like, we got out of the battle, everything's okay, we only have 30 days left in this hellhole. And you can still wind up like Brownie and you get shot. And the realism of Brownie's death scene is still something that really haunts me. Like, there's so many things about this film that genuinely haunt me. Um and that's one of them. It's so realistic. Like, when he's lying there after he's shot and he's bleeding everywhere and he's just like, fuck this shit. Like, it really hits home because that's exactly what would be going through the mind of any soldier who would have been in that situation. Fuck this shit, man. And his death is what caused Meserve to go completely off the edge. And I love how this script has stuff like that, where it really just provides motivations, it provides plausible psychological reasons for why Meserve wound up going as far as he did. And also a lot of reasons why the others went as far as they did. And it wasn't just because they're just crazy, except for Clark. Like, Clark was legitimately a sociopath. He got off on that kind of shit. Um, but Meserve, he just snapped after the loss of Brownie. Because even Erikson says at one point, like, Brownie wouldn't put up with this shit, man. So you have Erikson, who in a lot of ways is a voice of reason in this hellhole. He is trying to fit in with his fellow platoon members, but it's very awkward because they don't really mesh with his personality. Meserve, Clark, Hatcher, Diaz, and Erikson, they go on their own after they were essentially denied the ability to go into the city before they're supposed to go on their next mission. They were not allowed to go into the city to have some R&R because of the fact that there were some Viet Cong that were there and it was a security issue. And so Reserve, who's already reeling after the loss of his friend, and after just dealing with so much shit for his entire time uh, in Vietnam at this point, and it's all starting to boil over. And he's like, and he wanted to go into town and bang some girl and let out some frustration, but now he's denied that. So he decides to come up with this just disturbing plan to get that satisfaction by force. And so he gets the rest of his platoon together, and they go out and they find a girl and they kidnap her. And Erikson, he heard this plan, and he was talking to his friend, who's in a different platoon but was there, in camp, and he was like, "Man, I don't. This is what I heard him say." And the guy's like, "He's not gonna do that. Come on, man. Like, he's not gonna do that." And then Erikson goes with Meserve, and then he does just that. And Erikson is like, and after the girl is taken away from her family and just taken away to be essentially a sex slave, Erikson's like, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." And then after that, you get some really rough scenes where Meserve and the rest of his men, they take turns on this girl in a hooch. And prior to that, they were trying to intimidate Erikson to do it, and he refused. And so because he refused, they're insulting him. They're calling him a homosexual. They're doing all these kind of tactics that you can see from uh, mostly men in these kind of scenarios to try to use some peer pressure to get somebody to do it. It works on Diaz, who initially talked with Erikson before all of this and said, I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to sexually assault anyone. I don't want to do that. I don't want to rape anyone." And of course, Erikson's like, "You're with me, right?" It's like, "I'm with you." But when push comes to shove, and when Erikson was called out, and Erikson was looking towards Diaz to back him up, Diaz didn't. And you get some great lines of dialogue throughout all of this. Like when Meserve, he does the whole, he grabs his package in front of Erikson, and he's all like, "This is a weapon. This is a gun. This is for fighting. This is for fun." So like, "No, you're taking your turn." And Erikson's like, "No. Well, maybe when I'm through with her, I'm going to come after you." Or, "Oh, you want to take attack posture with me? Yeah, you got a weapon. Clark got a weapon. Clark got a knife. We all got weapons. Anybody can blow anybody away any second, which is the way it ought to be. Always." Just the lines did a great job just showcasing Meserve's complete and total loss of his sanity during this whole ordeal. It showed how unstable he was, and it showed how genuinely intimidating and scary and unpredictable he was. And they take their turns with the girl, and then you have that shot which I love with Michael J. Fox, and it's got a zoomed in shot of his face, and he's just completely shell shocked by what he saw. And there's rain pouring everywhere and all over his face. And Meserve, he comes out, checks on him, and he's like, "You probably like the army, don't you, Erikson?" And Erikson's like, "This ain't the army. This ain't the army, Sarge." And that line definitely makes you think, because he's right. This isn't the army. This is something else. This is something a lot more insidious and something a lot more sinister. This isn't about fighting for what's right and trying to, preserve the freedom of these people. Like, this isn't the reason why the war was started. But this is the fallout that happens when you have this mindset that's instilled in these young men in combat, in these wars, where, oh, you gotta defeat the enemy at all costs, even if you have to sacrifice your integrity or your own sanity. If you get some KIAs, it's all good. And I like the contrast that you have between Erikson and the other soldiers in his platoon. Like, when they get the chance to go back into battle and have the opportunity to kill some more people, Erikson is not really that enthusiastic about it. Just think about that. It's messed up. It really is. And just think about what that would do to somebody mentally, especially at a young, impressionable age. That now they're not only forced to grow up, but now they've killed. And now they have to deal with the aftermath of that. And they have to mentally compartmentalize and deal with that. It's a pretty heavy stuff. And because Erikson knows what's going on, he can't stand for it. And so he's trying to do what he can to help the girl. At one point, he tries to save her, but as soon as he's about to leave with the girl and risk becoming a deserter, which is a pretty serious thing if you're a part of the military, one of the platoon guys comes back, because it was all set up in a way where Erikson would go on this mission with Meserve and the other soldiers, because Meserve can't trust Erikson to be alone with the girl because of his convictions, because he just feels that what Meserve is doing and what these other fellow platoon members is doing is just completely unacceptable and wrong, and he wants to put a stop to it. So he tries to get him to go on the mission, but there's this one member of the platoon, Clark, who is just a gun happy, just trigger happy nut, and so he was like, I want some action. You stay here. And then when Meserve finds out about that, once Clark shows up, he's like, what the hell are you doing here? Go back to the hooch. Leave Erikson alone. And so then he goes back to the hooch, right? And he shows up at the hooch right about the moment when Erikson was trying to get her and go with her and leave and try to take her back to her home. The scene where she's all, this woman, this young girl, she's all disheveled and bleeding and is just pleading to Erikson for help is definitely some of the most some of the more distressing things that I've seen in a war film. And it just gets even more distressing from there, because then you get the scene on the bridge where this young girl, she's sick, because of the way that she's been abused, and she's coughing, and Meserve, he thinks that, oh, she just needs to shut up because she's gonna give away her position, and because he's so far gone, he's like, kill her. Tries to ask Erikson to kill her, and Erikson's like, hell no, I'm not doing that. And Erikson is unwilling to do it. Then he tries to get Diaz to do it. Diaz he's ready to do it with a knife, but then Erikson fires his gun, so that gives away their position. And then, okay, you think, okay, maybe there might be a way where Erikson could find a way to save this girl, even despite everything that's going against him at this point. But no. The girl gets away briefly, but then she's cornered by Clark, who then stabs her multiple times. And then, while she's stumbling away, bleeding to death, she's already dead. But Meserve, he's so off his rocker. He can't just let her stumble away and die. Yeah, he has to make sure that she's dead. And so he and the rest of the soldiers pump her full of lead, and she falls off the bridge and she's just dead on the rocks. And then Erikson, he can't emotionally, he can't take it anymore, and he just succumbs to the emotions and everything that he's seen and everything that he's witnessed, and he passes out. He then gets helicoptered out, and this is where he decides, I'm going to put my foot down. I'm going to do what I can to make to bring some justice, for this girl, because no one else will. And he goes to his superior, like the platoon commander, who basically tells him, don't disrupt the status quo. And he's like, I'm not going to stand for that. That's not acceptable to me. Then he goes to his platoon commander's superior, and this guy's giving Erikson shit too. You're going to get out of prison after serving next to no time. I was like, are you sure you want to do this? That man saved your life, and you want to ruin his? And Erikson's like, yeah, I'm gonna file charges. This is wrong. And because Meserve is still psychotic, he and Clark set up this plan to try to kill Erikson, try to blow him up. Doesn't succeed because Erikson escapes from the barracks before they explode. But there's a great moment where Erikson is just fed up, and he just goes to where Meserve and the rest of the guys are hanging out at, and he picks up a shovel and just smacks the shit out of Clark. Erikson is talking to his friend, who's starting to become similarly disillusioned and fractured mentally, like the other guys in the platoon. After this one cherry gets killed, everybody's acting like we can do anything, and it doesn't matter what we do. Maybe we got to be extra careful, because maybe it matters more than we even know. And then after that, you have this scene with Erikson and this chaplain. Erikson, he's talking to the chaplain at the bar. He's like, you a chaplain, sir? Are you religious, son? I'm a Methodist. I'm a Lutheran. Well, we can still talk, can't we? We went on a long patrol, sir, and we kidnapped a girl from the village. The other 4 men raped her, and they murdered her. And I failed, sir, to stop them. So after that scene with the chaplain and Erikson, which in all honesty features some of Michael J. Fox's best acting of his entire career, then it really does become more of a film about the trial. You have the people who are trying to intimidate Michael J. Fox into admitting that he fabricated the story, trying to catch him on a lie, but it doesn't work out that way. And then you get to the trial itself. And I think the trial scene, at least in the extended cut, because that's the version that I saw, because it has a scene with Erikson, which is not in the theatrical cut, which I think honestly makes this scene so much more compelling. And it's already a compelling scene, but it just adds an extra level to it. And this is also after they find the body of the girl. And you have that great moment where Erikson, after, Captain Hill's all like, you just couldn't leave it alone, now could you, Erikson? And Erikson's like, go to hell, sir. And I think this trial scene, when you have all these the 4 soldiers who are involved in this atrocity, and they're being grilled by the prosecutor, and they are providing their testimony, it really does provide clear explanation as to why all these soldiers ultimately did what they did for different motivations. It wasn't just one of those things where, Musgrave was just nuts and did everything himself, along with his fellow friend in Clark, who was also off the deep end and crazy. But you had Diaz and Hatcher, who were just, in a lot of ways, they were following the leader, and they were succumbing to peer pressure. And it cuts to Sergeant Reserve. Is it standard for U.S. personnel to have sex with prisoners and kill them? Prisoner tried to give away the squad's position. She was ill and coughing from the abuse of you and your men. She shouldn't have been there to jeopardize your position. You dragged her out and raped her, and then you blame her for coughing, so you kill her. Does that about sum it up? Well, sir, I've seen a lot of killing, which is our duty to do, because it's kill or be killed. Sometimes you hate the enemy so badly. About 2 ops back, Operation Turner, we saw Ho Chi Minh burned down. Some Vietnamese were carrying kids out of a bunker. They suffered from smoke inhalation. I gave one small child mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. That just shows you we ain't all combat over here. And I really like that bit with Reserve, where it just shows yet again that even in atrocities like this, even when it comes to trials like this, where these soldiers, these men are put on trial for war crimes, they've done good. It's not all black and white. And the trial ends with the 4 of them getting convicted. They are read their sentences. Seems like Reserve says one last word to Erikson, but you don't know what it is. Erikson wakes up from his dream, more like a nightmare, and you have this sweet scene where he's on the bus after he woke up, and there's this Vietnamese woman who leaves behind her scarf, and then he goes and grabs the scarf and then gives it back to her. And then, that's the end of the story. And I know there's also a mid-credits thing that says that Hatcher was acquitted. And it goes deeper than that, though. Like, all of these men, they got off. These 4 men, they served a total of maybe around 6 years for this crime, for the crimes that they committed. So it just shows you that even in a situation as horrific as this, because it's in war, because it's in that context, there really isn't justice being served. But that's the reality of things when it comes to war. There really isn't a moment where you win. You don't win a war, you survive a war. I think a good way to perfectly encapsulate, the casualties of war is something as despicable and as intense and as distressing as Reserve and his men kidnapping this woman and sexually assaulting her and then killing her. It also represents a lot of ways the assault of Vietnam itself during the war. And it's a war that there wasn't just casualties on the side of the Viet Cong. Americans killed their own men. I really like the fact that the script had that in this film, where they bombed the hell out of the area where Reserve and his men were trying to take a hold of, when they heard about the Viet Cong being there. And they firebombed the hell out of it. And yeah, they blow up the enemy's boat, but they also blow up their own boat and kill 2 soldiers. It shows you how senseless a lot of the violence, a lot of deaths were in Vietnam, and in honestly any war. But yeah, it's an intense script, an intense story, and it's still something that is just remarkably well done. And speaking of remarkable things, the cast is just really good. Some absolutely fantastic, phenomenal performances by everybody involved in the cast. Michael J. Fox delivers, in my opinion, quite honestly, along with Bright Lights, Big City, his best dramatic performance as Erikson. Uh, it's a great role for him because you bought him as the young, fresh faced kid who's in Vietnam who doesn't really fit in but has very strong morals and convictions. Like it really is a role that fits Fox very well. And Sean Penn was really spectacular as Meserve, just intimidating and just brutal and just intense, and a guy who you just legitimately were terrified of in certain scenes. Even when it comes to him like saying things like, I'm gonna hump you. Like it sounds silly, but the way that Sean Penn said it, it sounded sincere and it sounded crazy and it unhinged, and it didn't sound like he was joking. And so there was a lot of stuff like that with his performance, and just the sparks between him and Fox were just really strong. And Don Patrick Harvey was also really good as Clark, as this equally as unhinged member of the platoon. John C. Reilly was good as the guy who's just kind of the aw shucks, I'm gonna go with the flow type guy, and Hatcher is just trying to fit in. John Leguizamo was good as Diaz, who's a kind of a similar sort of thing. I don't want to rock the boat. I want to be, I want to be the best soldier I can be. I can't do that if I don't follow orders. Um, John C. Reilly, by the way, he was cast as more of an extra initially because Stephen Baldwin was cast in that role, but they did some scenes with him and they felt like that wasn't really the best. So then they decided to give the role to John C. Reilly. And you have Thuy Te as Tron. This is an incredibly difficult performance for any actress to pull off, and she did an amazing job with it. Like the trauma that she effectively displayed is downright haunting, and it will stick with me. And it's still haunting me right now. Like after I watched the film last night, and that's a testament to this actress's performance. And understandably, she pretty much stopped acting after this because it was just too traumatic and too much of a difficult role to really just go back into doing whatever kind of performance afterwards. Um, and they also had Eric King, who I wanted to mention, who did an excellent job in his small role as Brownie. You have Ving Rhames as Reilly, Dale Dye, who actually was in the military as Captain Hill, Sam Robards as the chaplain. The film features some really good cinematography by Stephen H. Burham. It's got some really good editing as well by Bill Pankow, and it features a really magnificent, chilling score by Ennio Morricone. Uh, and it's like 113 minutes. That's the theatrical version. The extended cut's like 2 hours, and it doesn't really drag that much. I think it's consistently compelling and engaging throughout. Definitely one of the most harrowing and just heartbreaking war films out there. But if you can stomach it, if you can handle the intensity and the emotion of it, I definitely think it's well worth your while. And that's my thoughts on Casualties of War. And until next time, as always, I'll see you later.